Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Marketing from the Trenches podcast. Now, in this episode, we're talking about something a little bit different. Now, normally in the show, we talk about things like Facebook marketing strategies, lead generation strategies, LinkedIn, content, all the type of tactical and also a little bit of the strategy behind how to create really good campaigns that bring in a whole bunch of leads, that turn into clients and customers and grows a business. So in this episode, it's a little bit different because we're going at a very, very high level and talking very high level strategy in terms of growing an organization. So I've got my friend Nigel Lee on this podcast. Nigel is an Australian who's moved over to the United States to franchise out a business called Espresso Delight. So Espresso Delight is essentially a coffee as a service business. I'll let him tell you more about it on the episode. Really cool idea, really cool business. And they've grown by more than 200 locations all across the world. So it's a really, really fast-paced, fast growth business, and the story of why they chose franchising, what to look for, understanding how to do it correctly, I think is a really good message for businesses out there who potentially think that this might be a way to scale. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. A lot of great information on there, and it's very comprehensive when it comes to franchising. So even if you aren't sure if it's right for you, you'll know by the end of this episode. And just before we launch into the episode itself, please do check out growthlabs.com. That's growthlabs.com/resources, where we've got a whole bunch of completely free resources to help you grow your business, grow your sales, grow your customer base, and get more revenue. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And I hope you enjoy it. It's a great episode, and I'll see you on the other side. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Marketing from the Trenches podcast. I've got my good friend on here, Nigel from Espresso Delight. Now, Nigel, we've been working together for a little while, and actually I've been meaning to kind of get you on here for a little bit and find out a little bit about, how you got to where you are. So for everyone who hasn't gone through an intro, what we're discussing today is all about franchising and growing businesses through franchising. And, Nigel's an absolute expert at doing that. And you're actually an Aussie living in New York at the moment.
Yeah.
So tell us the story behind
thank
that.
you.
Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me, Will. I appreciate you having me on. So I'll try to keep that story as short as possible. But when I left school, I didn't go to college or take the traditional path. I actually spent a little bit of time overseas and doing kind of that whole gap year thing, really trying to work out who I was and what I was going to do. And then when I came back, I actually met my now wife, because I was going for the whole, I'm young and I'm going to travel forever and be single and do that whole thing. And that lasted a whole of about 6 months. So then I actually got into an electrical apprenticeship and went through that process. And about halfway through, I realized it was great. It was really good money. And I was doing the whole fly in, fly out thing in Australia and making some good coin. But what I realized was that I didn't want to kind of do that life forever, and I wanted to kind of leverage time and not be kind of working for every dollar that I earned. So that whole transition spent about 12 or 18 months kind of just looking in and out of different businesses, in the paper, online, and kind of just doing due diligence, never really committing to anything. And then, long story short, I found Espresso Delight. So us as a brand, we started all the way back in Australia in 2003. I found them in 2009, 2010. And it was for the area developer for Western Australia. So that business model was purely based around me soliciting, training, and supporting new and existing franchisees, as well as running my own franchise. And then from that point, and in about an 18-month period, we had doubled the size of Western Australia with both our franchise numbers and the coffee systems that we placed. I was then speaking to the founders and was offered the opportunity to bring the concept here to the United States. So since that point, I've been here in New York, in the United States, going through probably what we're going to talk about a little bit here, about really just understanding the market, proving out the concept along a number of different levels, being unit economics, systems, and everything else. And now we're at the point that we're really trying to scale it out across the country and really just dominate the office coffee market. So that's kind of the short version. But I think the whole in the trenches thing is really apparent for me that, look, I didn't have any official training or university degrees or anything like that. I really just got stuck in, put my head down, made a lot more mistakes than successes. But I think that the biggest thing is I learned from all of that. And I think where I'm trying to build to now and support people that I speak to that want to come into franchising is really just limiting the amount of money and time that they spend to get to the point they need to. I think I could probably save myself, if I did this all over again, 5 to 7 years, and probably about $1 million as well. So I think if I can help anyone save any amount of time and money, it's definitely a benefit.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's such a cool story. And, I think one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on this podcast as well is because, a lot of the times we get lost in the online stuff. Like that's the stuff that I live and breathe in. But I know that there's other businesses out there who might not even be that savvy online, and they're growing like Espresso. You guys are growing like crazy. But you guys are actually quite good at online stuff. I'm not saying you guys aren't, but there's other businesses who are just expanding, and they're just, flying under the radar, doing hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and they're not even tapping into online. So I think it's really good to kind of bring a different perspective into what's going on. And so franchising is a very interesting model, I feel. So from your experience then, like you've gone through this whole journeying crazy path of taking a company from Australia and going to the US, whereas normally it's the other way around. What were the biggest challenges? Like what were the things that you kind of always bumped up against?
I think the biggest challenge I had was I didn't know a single soul here in the United States. I think when my wife and I moved here, we came here and we'd never been to the US. We didn't know anybody. So I think one of the biggest challenges I think we found was obviously just building out proof of concept to a point that made sense. And I think if anyone was going to look into franchising, I think the single biggest factor you have to understand is like, are you the biggest part of the business and can you extract yourself out of it? Because franchising is essentially duplicating systems across the board and giving your market proven system to another individual and then being able to implement it. So if you can do that, that's probably the biggest thing. And we spent a lot of time in the early days refining and changing our model or localizing our model from the Australian version to whatever nuances are here in the US. So I think that's probably the biggest critical element. And then I think the second part, and especially if someone is looking to launch a franchise here in the United States, and it's probably the same a little bit in Australia as well, is that every state is different and the West Coast is different to the East Coast. And I think proof of concept along different territories or different environments, being income, location, etc., really makes sense for someone to kind of build this out as a franchise concept. So I think that were probably some of our biggest hurdles, and even some now that we're still coming up against, that someone in California says, hey, we're not the same as people in New York. So I think really just localizing and get proof of concept in a couple of different areas really makes sense, and will allow you to scale quicker over time as well. And then I think lastly is really making sure that your systems and processes are in check, that if you do grow quickly, are you able to sustain that? Do you have the team and resources behind you to be able to cope with that? And again, that's something we're going through now. We're going through a growth stage where we're obviously looking internally and kind of we blew the castle up and we're rebuilding it right now just because we're going through that growth stage and we want to make sure we have that foundation built as well.
Yeah, awesome. Look, I really want to dive into that part too, because I think that's super important in terms of growth, because, ultimately I think, I don't want to say, I don't think anyone should ever say this is the only way to do marketing. So marketing essentially is just a function of growing the company. So I really want to dive into like what you guys are doing that's working, if you can share all that. But let's start at the very beginning, right? So let's just say someone's listening to this podcast, they've got a business going on at the moment, it's going well, and they're looking to expand, and they've never really thought about franchising, but they're kind of curious now that they're listening to this. What kind of businesses do you think do the best out of franchising, or do you think it's any kind of business?
Well, I think if you look at it, I think the one thing that I was taught very early is that when you go into business and you're looking to franchise, is if you can open a second location or a second unit or whatever that looks like, and you have a reference of success, then there is no reason why you couldn't have more references of success, right? So I think that's number one, that if you are looking to grow quickly, but obviously don't want to take the risk or don't want to build out a team nationally or regionally, and you want to leverage other people's time and money, then obviously franchising is a good opportunity, right? And the reason that most people franchise is to have brand standards and to increase governance, right? So there's a couple of things that if you roll a brand out, you really want to be able to make sure that all your standards are consistent, but you also want to make sure that you have governance over that, especially if you go nationally as well. So I think from that point of view, I think it could cover a number of different industries. And I think there's a lot of success stories across a lot of different things. I just think that the number one thing you have to understand is that you're there to support that individual. And it's not just, hey, I'm going to give you the concept and see you later. I think if you're willing and able to train and support, there's a lot of great franchise success stories. I think sometimes franchising gets a bad name because of the negative parts of the business or companies that have been in it. But I think ultimately there's a lot of good operators out there. And I think if you have a good system and you really want to give back to other individuals and help people grow as well from a business perspective, then it's a great way to do business.
Yeah, fantastic. So let's dive into that, because you just dropped a whole bunch of great information. So let's kind of break it down and go into specifics, right? I think the best way to do that maybe is, let's go on a bit of a journey, right? So let's just take it, if I'm looking to franchise, if I'm looking to open up a different location, say, for example, I'm a cleaning business. What would be the first step for you? Like, what would you think about as a first step to getting the second franchise on board? The first franchise.
Yeah, so I think the first step, if you were looking to go into this, there's probably a couple of areas that any person that will kind of advise you on this will allow you to understand. Is the first is obviously systems and processes and documentation of that. So one of the key things I think anyone should go down the path of, whether they're franchising or not, is making sure that they're documenting all their processes and systemizing everything out, right? So the earlier you do that in your business, even if you're not looking to franchise, I think ultimately you'll get more sustainable growth and quicker scale over time. But I think ultimately, if you do make that decision to franchise, then you already have the core foundation of all that process there too. And then I think the second part is really getting good advice and finding really good attorneys on the legal documentation and agreement side. So especially here in the US, and not to go too deep into it, but like every state is different. There are registration states, there's non-registration states, and there's the franchise disclosure document. So here in the US with the FDD, so the franchise disclosure document, it's basically a document that outlines to the consumer exactly how the business operates and the terms and conditions. There's 23 items, everything from business experience of the company all the way through to financial representations and all these other elements in there to allow you to do that. So I think if you were going to explore that, I think they're probably the two biggest factors I would consider. And then after that, because they come at a cost, right? Like if you haven't documented your systems, that's a big undertaking to kind of go through that process. Even if you have 2 or 3 highly successful locations or units, that's a big process to go through. And then from a legal side of things, I think the biggest thing to consider there outside of cost is that you need to make sure you're buttoned up, right? You need to make sure that when you're going into an agreement with another individual that typically you don't know, that you can obviously have some systems in place that make sure that everyone's operating at the same level. And then I think post that, it's about where are you currently located? Are you looking to go regional now, or are you looking to go national? So do you just want to sell locally? Like us here we started in New York. So all our initial franchise sales were in the Northeast and then on the East Coast. And now we're starting to spread west and go across the country and do it that way. So for us, it was more about concentration, localization, and then kind of building out from there. So kind of taking those points of view. And then I think I said before, and I think it's really important that when we started to build out and why we're starting to go west now is we're really trying to get different environments and territories into our system. So we have different reference points. We can understand unit economics and profitability across a number of different levels, which is a hugely important part of the business, right? Like people are typically get into any business to make money. Ultimately, like some people say they love it, which is great, so. But if they're not making money, they're not going to love it for very long. So I think if you can prove it out from a monetary point of view, then it'll be a lot easier to sell moving forward as well.
Yeah, perfect. That's awesome. So let's just say that, we've got the system set, we've brought someone in, fixed all of our systems, we're actually ready to go. We've got the legal stuff done. How do you normally find how do you find the people who want to do the franchising?
Yeah, this is the whole part of marketing, right? So I wish I had the golden goose or the golden egg. So I think one of the key things, like anything, is you really do need to define and understand who your ideal candidate is. So even for us, and I'll give you an example with Express Delight. So Express Delight, when it was founded in Australia, was created as a lifestyle business. So the two founders had previous businesses before, they were C-level executives, and they were kind of sick of the whole, like, having teams, spending huge amounts of money on infrastructure. And they really wanted to create a business that was simple, nimble, and was able to scale quickly, but with minimal people and resources. So in Australia, it was a lifestyle business. When we got here in the US, the landscape of franchising was different. So we started out with that point of view. And then as we kind of found some candidates, worked with some and then kind of progressed through where we are to today, we figured out that, look, here in the United States, we're better off having a higher net worth, multi-unit type of franchisee that has the experience, resources to be able to build something quickly, and that can have a bigger business than was traditionally in Australia as well. So I think number one, I would definitely spend some time figuring out who your best franchisee is. And now, if you have other units or some initial franchisees that you sign on, they may be that right criteria, but I think I would definitely spend a lot of time figuring that out. Then across the board, there's obviously a number of different ways to do it. You obviously have online. There's a ton of franchise portals that do lead generation. There are a number of different broker networks and elements like that can bring you leads. What we had done, and it's a company called Oakscale, we partnered with a franchise development company that specializes in this. So one of the biggest things in franchising is, and in any lead generation, it can be expensive, right? So I think there's a stat out there, and I'll have to find it. I don't know where it was from, but I remember reading it, that in every franchise, typically when you come in and you sign a franchise agreement, you pay a franchise fee. And that is typically like, I'm buying the rights to this business model to operate it, and there's a fee associated with that, because obviously as us as franchisors, we spend a lot of time and money developing it. So normally in franchising, most franchisors and companies spend 110% of that. So they spend over the franchise fee to generate one franchise sale, which is obviously an expensive game. But when you come into franchising as a franchisor, you really are building a business for the back end royalty system. So you're spending a lot of time and resources to get the business moving, for obviously that annuity that comes when people build their business. So when we partnered with Oakscale, we did a deal with them that was commission based, but that was built around that franchise fee structure, and really utilizing someone who understood how lead generation works in franchising, who the right candidate was, and how we can quickly onboard them and get them through as well. So there's no right or wrong answer here. Like, there's some stats out there that are like, with the online lead generation portals in franchising, that people or franchises only close like 1 in every 300 to 400 leads, which can be an expensive game, right? So that's why it's very critical to understand who your target market is, who your ideal candidate is, because if you don't, you'll be flushing a lot of money down the toilet, right? So you want to make sure you button that up pretty quickly as well.
Yeah, fair enough. So it's all about knowing, the type of person you want driving the business, because obviously, I think there's franchises out there which it's kind of like, as you were saying, a very lifestyle business, where if they're turning over, a decent salary for themselves, they're happy to just leave the business as is. They don't really want to grow. Whereas I think with what you, or who you're going after, there's more the, not so much aggressive, but people who are just hungry to do a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
So I guess distinguishing between them, and then there's a whole bunch of tools and resources that people can use to find other people who are looking to bring the franchise on and take on the franchise.
Agreed. And then again, I think you can use other references out in the market already. And unless you're creating something very new, I think there's going to be other businesses like yours already franchising. And I think what I would do is look at their top 20, 30% of franchisees out there and who they are as candidates, and use them as a benchmark, and then maybe pivot from there and see where it may work. And it's no different to having a marketing agency or anything else, right? Like, you really truly need to understand who your demographic is and who your ideal client. And I think you'll be able to sell quicker, but you'll be able to save a lot of money in the process as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So, okay, cool. So, let's just say as part of the journey, we know we want to franchise. We've got all the legals and stuff, done. We know who we're going after. We've gone out to market. We've got a whole bunch of leads. We're only converting 1 out of 300 or 400. So it's an expensive exercise, but we know what it is because we're front-loading the cost, and the real business grows on the back end, right? So that's the kind of journey so far. So, as the franchisor and as you're growing, what are the main things to watch out for as you go past, 2 or 3 franchises?
Great question. So I think the biggest thing is obviously when you get into the system, it's training and support, right? So depending on what business model you're in and how it operates, whether it's a quick service restaurant or whether it's in the service industry like we are, it really depends on how your training module works and how your back end supports. So we put a lot of time and money into those 2 elements. So for us, and the other reason why we partnered with Oakscale on development was that not only is franchise recruitment expensive, but it's time consuming, right? Any lead generation process takes time. So we wanted to remove ourselves as much as we possibly could from that process and really concentrate our time on training and support of new and existing franchisees. So what I would really probably recommend to most people is, once you train your first few franchisees, really use them as a case study to really build out, like, the systems that I'm implementing, the training that I'm giving, does that work? What is the timing to get them from launch all the way through to whatever success looks like for your business? And can I improve that each and every time? And I'll use it, like, we've sold over 200 franchises internationally. We've got 15 years of experience and operation. And even here in the US now, we've sold 13 units and we're about to close another 5, and we have probably another 20 backed up behind that. And every single training, we go and deliver training, and it's happened the last 3 times, so I know from experience, is that every time we go to training, we implement it and we come back and we've rewritten the training manuals every single time. Now, not every page, but we've gone through and we've developed this, and we've gone through the training. We said, look, we could definitely improve this. Like, let's see what we can do to get quicker results, or let's see where we can bridge the gap. And it was everything from implementing new sales and marketing systems all the way through to like simple documentation. So like for us with coffee machines, like we're delivering training, and what we kind of saw was franchisees were taking some notes, which taking notes is fine, but there were some elements that probably should have just been in the training manual. So we went back and we're like, all right, what notes did you take? They showed us. I was like, actually, I could just put that in the training manual and we could deliver it more succinctly as well. So I think if you can do that, the reason that's probably the most important is you'll get replicatable success quicker, because everyone will kind of be implementing those same systems, so brand standards, and governance. But I think ultimately what that'll show is results, which will get you quicker sales long term, right? Because I think the ultimate goal is to prove out the first 2 to 5 units, and then after that, everything should kind of be downhill from there, in the sense of being able to drive more sales easily and cheaper as well.
Okay, perfect. Yes, that's great. So so you guys have grown massively throughout doing this. And obviously this is a question that, going to be a little bit sensitive. You don't have to answer in the fullest, but, have you ever had a case where a franchisee hasn't really done the right thing? Like, and how do you manage that? Because obviously brand is...
Yeah, great question.
Right?
Yeah, I think I'd love to answer that question, because I think it's probably the most important question in the whole of business and franchising as well. So I think ultimately 2 things. One part of our process in franchise recruitment and doing due diligence on us, and then us doing due diligence on them, is that we're very forward and candid about, look, franchising isn't about signing an agreement and then just collecting checks, right? Like, you just don't get this business and it just works. It's about you implementing the systems as a franchisee, and to the way that the market proven system was built out. So the case in point for that question is that most of the time in any franchise business, the ones that aren't successful are typically the ones that go outside the system and don't do what they were trained in, or aren't implementing the systems that they were given. So I think that's probably number 1 point, is that really just allow the franchisee to understand that, look, this system does work. We've proved this over X years and over X number of units. And if you implement this the same, we have a reference of success, and you can be successful too. And then with the ones that aren't successful, obviously, again, it's a support element, right? Like, I think our goal is to get all our franchisees as successful as they can, and then I think they operate independently. But if they don't, we spend most of our time with the ones that aren't as successful or are struggling or need further support, because I think you're only as successful as that bottom franchisee. And then sometimes, right, like, there's going to be some people that come in that it doesn't work for, right? That's with any business and even employment, that sometimes you get a role and it doesn't work out. So I think ultimately you have to recognize that and just be true to the fact that, look, if it's not working, what can I do? Implement measures. And that's why having tight legal agreements and tight operations manuals with really minimum performance criteria helps, because no one wants to come in and kind of throw down the hammer, but you need mechanisms in place to be able to make change. And if you don't, then you really can't do anything to make people successful past that point as well. And then I think after that, then it's obviously just about moving on, and we're always very clear about that. We just want to make people successful, and if they're not, and it's not the right thing for them, then what can we do to obviously help people go on to the next stage? But I think for us, again, if you are looking at the right candidate and you're vetting them in the right manner, those percentages should be fairly low.
Yeah, perfect. So that makes perfect sense. Look, I want to find out a little bit more about what you guys are doing, but just before we transition into, what your plans are for the future, I've kind of got one more question based off that, right? So let's just say, people listening, a small business owner going, sounds kind of interesting. I wouldn't mind exploring this idea of franchising out. How risky, like what's the risk in there? Because it might be a thing that they might like, they might not like it. Obviously there's a barrier to entry, right? What do you think that barrier to entry is? And is this an idea they can test? Or what's the low risk way of trying?
So if someone was getting into business for the first time, you're asking?
No, so if someone's looking at franchising.
Oh, franchising their business?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if someone, again, what I would probably do is I would go out and speak to and find as many franchisors as I can and really have conversations with them. And that was one of the first things that we did, or I did when I came here to New York, was I'd already been in franchising, but we had tried to get to as many advisors as we could, meet as many people as we could, understand the landscape, the environment that you're in, and align to as many as you can that is close to your concept, right? And I think you'll probably be thinking like, oh no one's going to want to talk to me, especially if I'm competing. But I don't think that's true. Like, I think people in business are always willing and able to help. And I think even if you are in a similar business, I think everyone believes that their business concept is better than anyone else's anyway. And I think people are more than willing to help them. So the number one thing I would do is go out there. And then from that point, I would, one, obviously build out as many test units as you can or locations. So one thing that I'm speaking to another franchise concept right now, and most franchise brands, and I'll just use this example with Australian brands coming to the US, you'll find there's a lot of great Australian brands, franchise brands. They come to the US and some of them are very large, like even purchased by private equity, and they come to the US and they're not successful. And I feel as though the reason for that is that they come here and they just start selling franchises, start opening units and thinking that with the same model that they had in another international territory, it's just going to work the same. But unfortunately, it's not like that. So the recommendation I typically give is when you're considering franchises, normally it's someone who has, let's say, a restaurant, they have 4 or 5 of them, and they're like, I want to get bigger. Maybe I don't want to do all the rest of it myself, so I'll go to franchising. So once you get to that level, I would definitely say build out 4 to 5 units, test them in different areas of environment, make sure it works for you before you completely commit to franchising, because you are controlling those extra units. And if you are, and you can't handle that, you're probably not going to be able to handle 100, 200, 500 units of a franchise with 50 different personalities, right? Which is the biggest part of this business is there's super high and there's super lows, and it's like there's all these different elements that you've got to kind of deal with. And then once you've proven that out, then I would say go into the market, sell your first 2 or 3 franchises, and then even hit the pause button. I think everyone gets super excited about, all right, let's get to 100 sales like as quickly as possible. But I think you need to make those first individual sales as successful as possible, not just for their success, but for yours as well, right? Because if you can't prove out those first 2, or if you fall over, which is what happens to most people, and why they go away after about 2 years, is because they haven't got proof of concept with those first franchisees and haven't really made them successful as well.
Yeah, awesome. That's such a good answer. Cool. So, like, just before we wrap this up, I really want to find out about, obviously you guys are growing like crazy. Like, what's the plans? What's the trajectory? And, where are you going to take this thing?
Good question. So we actually had just been going through a 2-year process of what I just explained about getting our first franchisees. We put some time into them, and we have some more sales now that we're trying to do a similar thing on. And we're building out, I think I mentioned before, we kind of got to this point and we said, look, we have the ability and it looks like we are going to grow very quickly. And the remaining of 2019 is going to be that, but it looks like 2020 is going to be exponentially more. And we kind of just sat back, and I can't show you now, but we've got those big like whiteboard paper posters on the wall. There's about 12 of them. And we just recently had a huge strategy session and just kind of dumped a ton of information out. And we've kind of brought all our systems to a point that we're rebuilding pretty much everything and really just making sure that we can handle growth and support. So I think number one, as a company, we're really trying to change the way people experience coffee in the office. And that comes all the way down to our most important part of the business being customer service and what we're really concentrating on. So we're really trying to define our mission and vision and really push that through. But then I think as a broader growth plan, our next 3 to 5 years looks like we want to be in the top 50 cities in America with an average of over 200 coffee machines per territory, which gives us about 10,000 coffee machines in the United States. And for us to be at that level would be a significantly big business, and we'd probably only capture a couple of % of the market. Obviously, the United States is pretty big. So for us, it's pretty exciting. And then probably the 10,000 foot view is, because we're in B2B and because we're nurturing all these relationships and we have a lot of great clients and we're very close to them, what we've realized is that it's an underserved market, this office distribution market, and that I kind of hate this because everyone says it, but it is ripe for disruption. I think this market is still selling like it's 1990. There's still some very old systems and companies out there delivering what they're doing and just in a way that should be changed. So I think our kind of vision for the future is that we're going to be spinning off a number of different brands that kind of complement what we're doing with the relationships that we have, and they will all be franchising as well. And mostly, in my view right now, and this is more hearsay than until we implement it, but we're probably going to look at more of the McDonald's type model when we do that, by going internal and really offering these things to internal franchisees, because we already have the partners there, the relationship and the success. And then I think ultimately as well, like, we have a ton of experience in the franchise industry here now in the US, and we really want to cut a niche into helping franchisors either come into franchising or grow and scale their business, especially from Australia to the United States. I think obviously, me being Australian, I want to get back there at some stage, but I also want to make sure that the brands that are there that are hugely successful can be successful here too, because I think some have come over and failed that shouldn't have, and I think it'd be great if we had more success stories here in the US and not the other way around.
Yeah, perfect. Great answer. So final question before we wrap it up, or actually second and final question, is a bit of a weird one, right? But what should I have asked you that I haven't?
I don't know, to be honest. I think you've asked very good questions. I don't know if there is anything that you could have asked me as well. Not sure, to be honest. I think you're pretty good there.
Awesome. And just final thing, if anyone wants to talk to you about the franchising model and find out more about what you guys are doing, or if anyone is even looking at potentially talking to you about taking on one of your franchises, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, just for now, I think if they just want to check out what we're doing at Express a Delight, just go to either expressadelight.com or xdcoffee.com, and they can see some information there. And if they want to get in touch with me, obviously it's Nigel Lee. You can just look me up on LinkedIn or anything else. Or if you just put an inquiry form in the website and just say you heard me on there, so I'd be more than willing to reach out and happy to have a conversation. I think, if anything, I've kind of built everything we've done here in New York and now the United States on relationship building. I think that's all of us have. And I think I started from day one just building relationships. So if I can help you and anyone else kind of understand the landscape of business and franchising more and get you to the point that you need. And I think more importantly, and I thank you for this introduction. I talked to someone that you will introduce me to yesterday, and I think we ended the call with, we're going to go deeper into exploring franchising. But ultimately, if my viewpoint is, look, don't franchise or go speak to someone else and do it this way, then I think if I can get you to that point, that's better. It's not just about always saying go and franchise, because I think that's the overall point. And probably the biggest thing I should make is that don't franchise just because you think it's a good idea, right? Like, really look into whether it's the right decision for you, because a lot of the failures shouldn't be franchising, and a lot of the bad name that franchising gets is just because there's a lot of companies out there that say, give me a concept and I'll franchise it. And then they sell 5 units and then 2 years later, they're gone and out of franchising. So I would definitely just suggest that. If you want to reach out, happy to help. I've enjoyed this podcast. I love talking about franchising and what we're doing. So I appreciate it, Will.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, mate. You've shared some absolutely gold, I should say. Some great information. And again, thanks for coming on, and thanks for such a kind offer to everyone listening.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks, Will.